I'm also leaning on another concept from the entrepreneurial mindset called parsimony, and I think this quote really describes it well. It requires you to find ways of avoiding investments in assets and commitments to fixed costs until there are revenue streams to justify them. So it's this notion of spending your intellectual capital before you spend your financial capital. And I'm not claiming that I know anything about computers or apps, so I wasn't going to outsource an app design based on assumptions that I didn't know were true. So what methodologies did I use? How did I do this? As I mentioned earlier, I'm using a methodology from the Lean Startup by Erik Schwarzenberg in entrepreneurship. It's this notion of a feedback loop. It's the build, measure, learn. So you build a product based off assumptions, you send it out to your target population, and based on what feedback you get, you reiterate your product. So the idea is to do this in multiple loops until it's refined enough that you can actually justify selling it or investing in making it a product to be sold. So how did I measure it? I leaned on my background in sociology, and I used qualitative research. I designed a survey that I attached to the blog that students would go take. And it was qualitative research. I thought it was good because it's exploratory, it's socially focused, and what better way to study students that are going to be using an app than on the same platform that they would be. So like a computer, a tablet, or a phone. I want to take you to my blog real quickly and just show you some of the features. So here's what the students in the Commons and TrueGrit saw. So we have the What's Cooking feature. This is basically like a photo feed from like Instagram, but it's just what students are cooking on throughout the campus. There's a crave feature, so maybe you can search what you're craving by hashtag, the ingredient or the cuisine or the type of food. Maybe there's other people on campus that are wanting to cook the same thing. There's a crowdsource my kitchen feature, so maybe you need certain utensils that you don't have and somebody else needs ingredients that you have, and you can come together and make this meal. There's also a recipes feature. There's a nutrition component, so if you want to track your macronutrients or micronutrients. I use the myplate.gov template just because it's like the modern day food pyramid, but the idea would be that you could tweak it however you want. And then lastly, because we are college students, the bill. If you're coming together and you're putting ingredients on the table, you might want to cost it out. So those were the features they saw. So what did my survey find? There's different types of consumers in the Commons versus TrueGrits. So the numbers by those are the number of my sample size for each. So I found that there are more commuters in the Commons than there are in TrueGrits. And that kind of reflected what they wanted to use most anyway. So in the Commons, when there are more commuters, they said that they'd want to use the recipes feature the most. Whereas TrueGrits, where there is more on-campus residents, they said that they would want to use the What's Cooking feature, which is basically like a photo feed of food that's being cooked around campus. I did think it was encouraging that 90% of people in the Commons and 83% of the people in TrueGrits agreed that the app would make them want to cook more. So I'm going to talk a little bit about why this is interdisciplinary. So I believe my project is using instrumental interdisciplinary from Repko's interdisciplinary research process and theory. He describes it as problem-driven. It's borrowing knowledge from some disciplines and applying them with other disciplines, and the emphasis is on integration. I'm also using his concept of redefinition. I'm attempting to redefine cooking as a social experience through this app. So how is it interdisciplinary? So I'm building complex and multi-causal explanations. So there's a biopsychosocial picture of why students choose one food over another. And then I'm using entrepreneurship to design an intervention to bridge the explanation-action gap. So here's a real-world example. This study by Shope was a meta-analysis of health behavior apps and how effective they were. And they claim that apps can be an effective tool to improve health behaviors. So I kind of wanted to know, what they were citing in the study. One of them was Smart Appetite. So it's made by a team of researchers from a couple of colleges up in Canada. And it basically sends users tips for like where to buy local produce or local breads and stuff, and what to do with that. And that was one of the apps cited in the Shope article that I found that was relevant, and it was interesting because it was like this is kind of what other people are doing with this. Here's my references page. I would be glad to go back to it. So what did I learn? So the sample size of my study was pretty small. My product was not functioning, so I would hope that it would become an app one day after a couple of iterations. But I think that FairFinder as an app could promote social cooking at UMBC. Thanks.
Questions from people who eat at UMBC or don't? It's our 3:30 class who are experts at avoiding eye contact at all times.
I'll ask a question. Sure. See, you mentioned redefinition, that you were redefining cooking as a social experience. I guess I always thought of cooking as sort of a social experience. Can you just expand on what you're trying to get at there?
Okay, sure. So the idea with this app was that, students are not using the dorm cooking kitchenettes, because it's kind of easier to kind of go outsource and swipe your meal card and get a meal at the Commons or True Grits. So although you would think traditionally cooking is like a social experience of coming together, on a college setting, I didn't really think that it was quite like that anymore. It was kind of distanced. So the whole idea behind the FairFinder blog was to kind of make it more social and kind of emphasize, like when you go to like holiday gatherings and you're like cooking things from scratch with your family, kind of have that emphasis on it to make it a little less about like, oh, I don't have the time or the money or the resources to go out and cook this. I'll just swipe my meal card and make it something fun and social.
I mean, I had a very similar thought process, so you stole the words out of my mouth, but if I could just press them. Did you find or read any literature that talked about other folk who in the traditional world of cooking have focused on holiday cooking as a social activity? Or did you find any literature that talks about cooking and makes your point that it was very much focused on the individual?
No, I guess my literature I was looking at biopsychosocial factors, and that's a huge world, so
yeah.
It didn't really take me there.
Gotcha.
I suppose it could have, but
Thank you for honesty.
Okay.
Yep.
So you made an interesting leap from the Reese's ideas around iteration, and instead of iterating through the app, and I thought you said it perfectly, I don't know anything about computer science and building applications. Do you believe you can get the same iterative process through leveraging your blog as the place to do it?
I think there will come a point where I will have to outsource it, but I didn't want to do it this early in the process. It was kind of like I said, the concept of parsimony. I wanted to kind of have a more refined, and I still do want to have a more refined idea of what features I want to emphasize before I outsource the building of that. So.
And are you finding that? Are you finding the ability to iterate on the blog? I guess that's a more direct question.
Yeah, I think very much so.
Okay.
Because I can pretty much write whatever concepts I want on the blog. I can't make them function, but yeah.